Asian defense equipment makers spurred rallies of related shares on stock markets last year as investors bet big on global rearmament, with security taking priority amid geopolitical tensions. That being said, on Press Perspective today, we touch upon Korea's defense industry. Hello and welcome to yet another edition of Press Perspective for this Thursday, February 6th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. Now, bolstering defense is a national priority for any country, and Korean arms makers are hoping to better advance this global agenda. For more on this, I have Steven Borowiec, a staff writer for Japanese weekly news magazine Nikkei Asia. Steven, it's great to have you back.
Always a pleasure.
I also have Professor Kim Junmo at Konkuk University live on the line. Professor Kim, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
My pleasure to be with you today.
Right. Steven, we'll start here in the studio. Asian defense stocks rallied last year, with investors betting that this particular region is poised to fuel a rearmament boom. Can we start with that reality and also, of course, your prospects?
I think it comes from just a general sense that more kind of geopolitical tensions and uncertainty are in the offing. And particularly now with Trump having taken leadership in Washington, Trump has said a lot about not wishing to come to the defense of allies, not wishing to play the U.S.'s customary stabilizing or supportive role in international affairs. He's talked about taking a much more transactional approach to the U.S.'s foreign policy and wanting to kind of only do things that are narrowly in the United States' interest. And I think a lot of observers interpreted that as a good occasion to look into potential alternatives. And so as I'm sure we'll discuss in a lot more detail, South Korean defense firms have risen to this challenge, to this opportunity, and they have bolstered their own efforts to expand their capacity and efforts to seek out new markets and to fill these kinds of gaps, specifically related to the growing uncertainty caused by Russia and by China, and all kind of in tandem with what's happening in the U.S. So I think what happens in the market tend to be a reflection of concern, of worries over different things. So I would interpret the spike in these defense stocks as kind of hedging against increasing geopolitical risk.
Right, and perhaps staying with what Steven has just said, Professor Kim, do you believe that Mr. Trump's return to the White House is likely to fuel greater global defense spending?
Yes, basically President Trump's policy orientation is U.S. first approach in trade, economy, and defense, which means he will push for increased defense spending to allies in Europe and Asia. The punchline is that more defense budget requested for government means more business opportunities for arms contractors worldwide.
Right. Meanwhile, Steven, quite a number of media outlets have covered the reasons behind Korea's remarkable advances in arms development. Could you share these reasons with us? And what are your thoughts regarding Korea's competence, if you will, with regard to arms development?
It's a story that is kind of in the same vein as South Korea's ascendance in a number of other industries, whether it be shipbuilding or manufacturing or whatever. It's a cooperative relationship between governments and business and an investment in manufacturing capacity. And this all kind of goes back to the history of the Korean War and the South Korea feeling as though it needs to have a strong military and arm itself against the threat posed by North Korea. But what we've seen more recently is that the government has transitioned to not simply seeing its arms industry as a source of its own defense, but also as a quite significant commercial opportunity. And South Korean arms makers have been able to build a reputation for being fast, for being reliable, for being accurate, and have been able to manage, expand their client bases based on that, based on being able to quickly deliver armaments and artillery shells and all kinds of other things. And just in recent years, as I think we'll touch on more later, they've really taken advantage of the opportunity presented by Russia's invasion of Ukraine in the fact that you have a lot of NATO countries who are in need of quick delivery of a lot of shells so that they can be used on the battlefield. And there just has not been, in Europe and in the US and some other places, there just has not been the capacity to fill this as quickly. Countries in Europe have, over the past decades, generally drawn down their defense capacity and their manufacturing capacity more generally. South Korea hasn't done that, so it was kind of in the right place at the right time. And it's, I think the kind of current moment is a little bit different, but you look back at the past couple of years, companies like Hyundai Rearmament and Hanwha have signed these massive deals, and it's led to a lot of optimism.
Right, indeed. And staying with that, Professor Kim, could you tell us a bit more about Korea's defense industry's advances, steady advances that will be into the global arms market? What do you believe has been driving Korea's strides in defense?
Okay. While taking increased international tension and conflict and reduced arms production capacity worldwide after the Cold War period as a given backdrop, I can mention about three factors. First is, as Steven mentioned, fast delivery, flexibility, and quality of the defense products by the Korean companies. First, while the competing industry will take longer time frame, Korean defense industry could deliver the product in a year or two, so it's very fast. And regarding flexibility, Korean defense firms offer very flexible, customer-oriented local production, technical assistance, allowing buyer countries customized design options. So that's very flexible choice. And regarding quality, in many fields, Korean defense products reach the top-notch level in international market. So that's the first factor. Second factor would be cost advantage. With strong backups by civilian sectors, together with Korea's own defense needs, pushed Korea to produce arms in large volumes. That gave us so-called economies of scope and connected to cost advantage. Thirdly, Korean defense products have maintained NATO and US technical compatibility, and that gives buyer countries easiness of maintenance, savings in education and training. So those are the factors for big stride these days.
Right, I see. And Steven, even before Mr. Trump's return to the White House, the government here had said that a second Trump administration would serve to boost Korea's arms exports. What exactly was said, and do you agree?
This was official from the DAPA, the Defense Acquisition Body. I can't remember the exact wording of the acronym, but he said that basically Trump's return to the office in Washington was both a challenge and an opportunity, just in that Trump could look to withdraw or decline U.S. support for certain allies, and he could encourage them to boost their own defense spending and take responsibility for this themselves, and that this could thereby create opportunities for Korean arms makers. And that's all plausible. I mean, as we've laid out, there's kind of increasing need for defense production in areas around the world, and there are places that are looking for someone like Korea to be able to quickly and flexibly fill these gaps. So, I mean, I think we're all hoping that just because of the return of Trump to Washington, that it's not going to lead to anything like what we've seen in Ukraine over the past few years. I mean, like, that's not in anybody's best interests, but I do think that Korean policymakers are always looking for potential growth engines and always looking for potential ways that South Korea can contribute to the overall stability of the world, and this is a part of that.
Right. Professor Kim, Korea hopes to become the world's fourth largest weapons exporter, arms exporter that is, by the year 2027. How feasible do you suppose is this particular plan?
Yes. Last year, Korean defense industry was expected to reach its export goal of $20 billion US. But that goal will be very likely to be postponed to this year. So this year, we are very likely to attain that goal. And last year, by a country's domestic reasons, together with Korea's domestic environment, had made this goal attainment delayed for several months. But broadly speaking, Korea becoming number 4 arms exporting country by 2027 is broadly feasible due to increased tensions and conflicts here and there, and together with President Trump's foreign policy. One thing to mention is a very peculiar nature of the defense market and the arms procurement business. That is, once procured, weapons are usually used at least 2 or 3 decades, and decision to buy weapons takes longer time, and the defense market themselves are very volatile, and they have their own business cycles. Yet, it is more realistic that Korea can become a number 4 arms exporting country by 2027 compared to 2 years ago. So I'm very optimistic about that.
Right, I see. Stephen, earlier last year, you also covered K-Defense, if you will. Could you share with us details about your particular coverage?
I think my editors were interested in it because of the parallels with the rise of certain other Korean businesses. You know, you had K-drama and K-pop, and here's K-Defense, you know, the latest glossy and high-tech and advanced industry to come out of South Korea. So when I embarked on this story, it was when we were reaching the, I guess, 2-year anniversary of the Ukraine war. We're now around the 3rd, and it was about how South Korea was taking advantage of this moment and all the growth and all the exciting things that were happening. I think we've basically gone over the kind of main points that I made in that article, but to introduce something a bit new to our conversation, I ended that article on kind of throwing it forward and kind of seeing like what the perhaps long-term potential of K-Defense was, because I had one expert who told me that it's important to keep in mind that this is a very kind of unstable industry. In the arms industry, you could have years where you have a bunch of orders and you have really impressive volume of both, you know, money that's coming in and product that's going out. But then you might have, you know, 2 or 3 or 4 years where things slow down. And so South Korea has expanded its profile, particularly in the countries that are on the eastern flank of NATO, such as Poland. And as Professor Kim laid out, there's a specific compatibility there because South Korea has worked with the U.S. military for so long, and those are NATO countries. And so it's quite easy to for those 2 sides to join hands and to have compatibility. But kind of where do they go from there? I mean, once they have solved, if they have solved this matter of expanding capacity to meet the needs of the Ukrainian military as they confront Russia, what then happens? Is there another part of the world where there is expanding demand? And I think that's a question that has not quite been solved yet. You know, as to where K-Defense might be 5 or 10 years from now. Will this momentum continue? I'm not quite qualified to answer that question. So.
Right, but for now, Korea is hoping to become the 4th largest weapons exporter by the year 2027. That being said, Stephen, what can you tell us about the competition that Korea faces? I mean, what do we know about the top 5 arms exporters at the moment?
Well, we know that number 1 is the U.S., and they're number 1 by a very significant margin. I don't know exactly what it is off the top of my head, but they're, you know, something like 2 times ahead of the next closest competitor. And then following them, you have France, Russia, China, and Germany. And so I would just say that, like, as pertains to South Korea's efforts to like move up this ladder, one thing we need to point out is that the arms industry is like any other industry in that it is governed to a large extent by relationships. You know, these are people who have been doing business for a long time. These are countries and governments that have longstanding institutional relationships with certain providers, and in a lot of cases they have the companies that they customarily work with, and they're probably happy with them, and it's hard for a new kind of upstart competitor to break into some of these more high value and more advanced chains. If you look at South Korea's drastic progress over the past few years, it was filling a particular niche. It was working with countries like Poland. So is South Korea going to be able to break into the real big time and to be able to, the goal, I believe, is to be number 4. It's not to overtake the US or France. But I think South Korea has, as we've laid out, definite advantages in terms of speed and reliability and a kind of stable manufacturing base. I've even heard that I had one expert tell me a little while ago that the industry is actually transitioning to the point where they're having to subcontract out their production. They're getting so many orders that they are, going to Eastern Europe and going to other places, and they are teaching firms there to manufacture on their behalf, and that's kind of a new thing for the industry. So we'll have to see where that goes.
Right, for sure. This is an impromptu question, Professor Kim, but earlier on when I asked you about the prospects of Korea securing its goal of becoming the 4th largest arms exporter within the next couple of years, that is 2027, you spoke about how that feasibility is higher now than it were, let's say, 2 years ago. Is that perhaps because of the violence we're seeing across the world right now, the war in Ukraine, the violence in the Middle East, and so forth?
Yes, Korean defense sector has keep knocking the doors for nearly recent 10 years to get the big chunk of market. But we should have our weapons or systems being tested at the right moment, at the right place. And the Ukraine crisis gave us a big open window to promote our products and together with the Middle Eastern market. So that's why, compared to 2 years ago, we now have greater potential.
Right. Professor Kim, staying with this idea of arms exports, but perhaps moving a little bit into a more perhaps sensitive issue, there is also talk about whether or not perhaps South Korea may consider developing, perhaps, this is an idea among some pundits, of course, developing its own nuclear weapons, since North Korea's nuclear weapons, according to some members of the Trump administration, and including Mr. Trump himself, have been recognized or been called a nuclear power. Speaking strictly within your capacity as a scholar, Professor Kim, what are your thoughts on Korea perhaps developing its own nuclear weapons?
There have been a lot of restrictions, bars in approaching that area. So still there are many political hurdles, technical hurdles to reach there. But meaning, whenever a country is industrialized at the cutting edge technology and industry, including a lot of European nations, a lot of several Asian countries, we can broadly say those countries have technically very advanced near the forbidden weapon of nuclear arms. But to do that, we should make the situation environment with the international community that we have very desperate need to do that. Plus, we need to conform domestic political will of the people and political leaders. And after that, there are 2 options. One is doing the right thing, really doing the thing, or taking the technological readiness to do that and not doing that and going to the last moment before the actual production of the weapon to show the strong willingness to keep the country, protect the country.
Right, of course, to protect the country. Professor Kim, Abu Dhabi, the capital city of the UAE, it's poised to host the International Defense Exhibition and Conference later this month. What should we be keeping our eyes on?
Yes, IDEX, which is to be held in Abu Dhabi in UAE, is one of the most famous arms exhibition in the world. And it is especially famous for live firing exercise held each year. So this year, Korean defense contractors are there to promote their defense products ranging from K2 tanks, K9 Howitzers, and sophisticated missile systems and others. During recent years, Middle Eastern countries like UAE, Saudi Arabia, Iraq have purchased our missile defense systems called Cheonggung-2. And it is very likely in the future it can be extended to a far more advanced missile defense system called LSAM, which takes the higher altitude of terminal stage of incoming missiles. So we have great market potentials for sophisticated weapons. And Saudi Arabia is also known to be interested in ground weapon systems, including K-2 tanks and K-9 Howitzers. So that's a great potential area as well. And to better utilize this opportunity, in fact, we have sent a battalion of K-2 tanks and K-9 Howitzers now in UAE to have joint exercise with UAE. And in fact, the same team was in Qatar later last year to show the potentials for joint exercise and then promote the performance of those weapons. So that's the first strategy, to show them really. And second strategy would be customizing into local needs of those countries, and also going beyond the areas of defense cooperation, going into industrial cooperation packaged with defense deals.
Right, I see. All right, Professor Kim, thank you so much for taking my impromptu question and for your responses today.
Thank you. I really enjoyed.
Right, and Stephen, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Right, well, developing defense for the purpose of promoting peace is a policy that looks to be universally embraced, especially amid the current geopolitical landscape. Thank you for watching.